The International Monetary Fund is forecasting that its GDP growth this year will be a little bit higher, probably about 1.5%. But that number is woefully inefficient if the country is to make a meaningful dent in unemployment, poverty and deep inequality. The country has one of the most unequal economies on the planet. Several sectors like agribusiness, mining, manufacturing and services do have the ability to expand at a much faster rate. But a range of constraints have held back quite a bit of growth. Let's get you the latest details on this. Angela Coppola joins us now live from Johannesburg with more data on this particular story. So, Angela, quite a few things to get through here. Among other things, the fund is calling for careful monitoring of the effect that this minimum wage law will have on SMEs right across the board. At this point, is there any evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, that suggests that it's doing more harm than good?
Well, Raman, as you know, that minimum wage has just been introduced. There has been a fair amount of commentary about its impact and the fact that it is a minimum wage and not a living wage. Unions understand this distinction, of course. Some analysts, though, suggest that the workers in rural areas should be given the option to opt in or out of the minimum wage because wages are relatively lower in the rural areas, and those rural SME owners won't be able to afford those higher minimum wages and would rather not employ as many people as they might have beforehand. That's the argument in certain quarters. Unions see the wage as a starting point. Some analysts wonder how you monitor the impact of a minimum wage when there are so many other variables that have to be taken into consideration and to account. Of course, if the economy is growing at more than 3% or more than the 1.5% that is projected by the IMF, then the minimum wage negative impacts are less pronounced because confidence levels are higher and the economy grows a lot quicker and people have more disposable income. So that virtuous circle then closes, Raman.
Indeed, clarifying mining regulations, specifically talking about the mining charter now. This also cropped up in the IMF statement. We should have had a mining charter review finalized by now, but that clearly hasn't happened. What's going on?
Well, according to the DMR, they're still on track. The last of the community involvement activities ended 2 weeks ago at the end of May. They were in 11 different constituencies or regions talking to mine-affected communities there. The Director General and the Deputy Minister there told me that they are consolidating the community responses that relate specifically to Charter 3. Next step is, of course, to release the draft document to stakeholders and then hold a Charter Summit to discuss it in detail. The draft should be released before the end of June, which they say is on track, and the summit that they're talking about is likely to happen sometime in July. So it is slightly behind schedule, but I'm told that Minister Mantashe wants to give stakeholders an opportunity to see the draft before any kind of finality or decisions taken on it, something obviously that his predecessor wasn't interested in doing, Raman.
Indeed, a consultative approach there. But let's talk about the public sector wage bill, much higher in South Africa compared to our peers. And according to the fund, rationalizing it is a priority. But you and I both know the state just recently agreed to a 3-year wage deal with public sector unions at about $2.3 billion above budget over the next 3 years. So what has to be cut in order to make room for that?
Well, it appears, according to some analysts, that nothing's going to be cut. It points to an increase being within the budget allocated for staff costs. The state wage bill is projected to rise about 7.3% to around $46 billion in the current fiscal year, and by a similar increase over each of the next 2 years. So if that doesn't cover any the increases that are going to be given to the public sector workers, the Public Service Minister suggested that they might freeze vacant government posts and use budget that was allocated to those positions to top up those increases if they need be, which I'm told is probably unlikely. So at the moment, as it stands now, it looks like nothing's going to be cut, but then again, we don't know, because they could also, of course, tap into an emergency fund that the government has access to cover any shortfalls. But that also appears unlikely, Raman.
Indeed. One last question for you. So the fund also calling for clarity around land reform. Hot button topic this in South Africa. As we know, the ANC has committed itself to land expropriation without compensation. That used to be the EFF's tagline. But where are authorities right now in actually implementing that policy, bringing it to fruition?
Well, Parliament are still canvassing South African citizens about the issue, and they have been given an extension until the 15th of June, that's this Friday, to make their comments. At last count, we understand that there were some 140,000 responses from citizens about that expropriation without compensation bill. Those responses will then have to be consolidated, added to a very large and complex database, and then key themes will be extracted from that. As you know, it's all about adjusting that Section 25 of the Constitution. Some critics suggest that the Section 25 actually doesn't need to be adapted or amended because it already makes allowance for expropriation without compensation. Others, of course, disagree. But in terms of deadlines, Parliament's program shows that it has a September 12 deadline to adopt its report. That's just 3 months away. That's when we're going to get a clearer sense of the practical steps that are going to be taken by the government. Raman?
All right, quite a bit to get through. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for the update. That's Angela Kuppler. They're live, of course, in Johannesburg, and expect a lot more content from him and the team in South Africa on their macro issues.